Welcome to College Admissions Toolbox, giving you the edge you need to get into the colleges of your dreams. With your host, Steve Schwartz. That's me. Today we're talking with Ryan Chan and Vishnu Hari. How are you guys doing today?
Fantastic.
We're doing really
Yourself?
I'm great. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. Now, you guys have a really exciting story. You've actually created a film called Acceptance, which is a 50-minute short film about a kid who doesn't get into Harvard but lies about it and says he did, and then things kind of spiral out of control from there. Can you guys tell us a little bit more about the movie?
Yeah, absolutely. So this movie, it's based on a true story. It's actually about Vishnu's senior year and my senior year. We were both very crazy college-bound kids and, trying to be very high achieving. I got into Yale. Vishnu got rejected from
I applied to it was miserable.
Well, basically what happened was Vishnu he went about the college application process in a very different manner than, say, I did. He was definitely selling himself really hard. He was doing a lot of things to correlate to specific passions that he thought colleges would sort of appreciate. And what ended up happening was on admissions morning, he just got rejected from everywhere, like one after the other. I was actually on the phone with him. It was a very, very painful day. And
Yeah.
Right. And when he went to school, I guess it was just, a difficult thing to say or admit. And I totally understand that because today in the era of social media, people, your successes and failures are made to be very public.
Yeah, I actually remember that day very, very significantly. It was a very painful moment. It's sort of the moment I realized I did sort of everything wrong when it came to the college admissions process. It's very fascinating seeing the contrast between how Ryan did it and the way I did it. We went to two very different schools. Just a bit of background, we actually grew up together in Singapore. We went to high school there, and I went to a boys' school, Ryan went to an international school. And in a sense, I guess his school better equipped him to go to the American universities. My school was more of a British school, so a lot of the kids went to, the British universities, Cambridge, Oxford, Manchester, UCL and stuff. So I was kind of on my own when it came to figuring out how the entire college admissions process worked for the American universities. And it was only a little too late when I realized I went about it in a completely wrong way. And a lot of inspiration from what actually happened between Ryan and myself that year.
So Vishnu, basically Ryan said that you kind of sold yourself too hard. Maybe you were a little bit too pushy in your application or too salesy?
My college essay, it was very manufactured, and It was very clear. I sort of manufactured it to evoke a certain emotion in the reader. And I think, when you're 18 or 17, whatever, you think you're the best salesman in the world. You think no one sees through what you're trying to do, but they do. It's very clear that you're trying to just fake something to gain a certain response from an audience. And it came through in my essay. My essay was about a trip I had in India where I was with my cousin and we rode on the top of a train. But I wrote it in like a very whimsical. I don't really remember it, to be very honest with you.
I remember it very, very clearly.
Yeah, you want to say a little bit? I actually don't remember it as much. I think I blocked it out of my memory.
The thing that really pops out to me is you had an image of the train like snaking through India, like a blue snake or something like that. But I think the part of it that was a little ridiculous was you were sort of turning it into like an action movie of sorts. Like you were jumping from train to train.
Yeah, it was like a lot of Slumdog Millionaire.
Yeah, and then after it's like you always you said that you set the Guinness Book of Record for the largest Bollywood dance in the world.
That's actually true, by the way. My school still holds that. That's actually a surprising fact of it. My school, ACS,
wow.
No joke, in 2010 organized the largest Bollywood dance. And the Guinness Book of World Records actually wrote it down. It beat the Slumdog Millionaire.
Right, and you took credit for it.
And I took credit for it. But that was one of those things that you put in to sort of boost yourself. And I think it came through. Like it came through that it was just entirely manufactured to evoke something. And I think that's part of the reason why I guess I got rejected. Among many others.
Let me say this. Vishnu is the type of person who should get into an Ivy League school. In terms of just, I've known him for a long time. He's one of the smartest people I know. He is a absolutely phenomenal writer. And this is the kind of sad thing about college admissions. It's very, very superficial. Honestly, it's almost like trying to hit on girls in a bar. You give like the wrong impression within that first 5 seconds, like the game's over. And that's kind of how admissions officers are. You know, they take a glance at your application. If you rub them the wrong way, you get put into, you're out.
And it doesn't. And the thing is, good grades and a fantastic CV and great SAT scores, they just qualify you to be considered. That next step is just, there's a bunch of different theories out there, I'm sure, about what gets you in past that next step, but it's not just good grades and a good essay or just like how do you say it, Ryan? It's not just it's the whole package, right, in a sense. And the problem with that is that students try to really consciously package themselves, I think.
Well, of course. So, I mean, you have your grades, you have your SAT scores, but there are plenty of students with the top grades and SAT scores. It's going to be some of those other soft factors, like how you write your essay, what you write it about. Maybe setting a Guinness World Record is the sort of thing that sounds great that you could use to set yourself apart, but obviously you don't want to come across as bragging, right?
Right.
And the problem is I came across as a huge braggart. It was very obvious.
And Ryan, how did you handle things? I mean, you guys have kind of contrasted yourselves as, Vishnu did it wrong, Ryan did it right. So Ryan, could you talk a little bit about, what you did with your application that you think led you to ultimately get into Yale?
Yeah, sure. So here's the thing. When my parents got divorced when I was in like 6th grade, I moved to the States for a bit. Originally, I was born and raised in Singapore, went to an international school, moved to the States, definitely fell behind because I went to a public school in New York. It wasn't very academically rigorous. I was also very severely dyslexic growing up as a kid. So I was always in all the stupid classes. I was in like the red group. You know how you have like the red group, the yellow group, and the green group? The green group being for the accelerated kids. So when I finally went back to Singapore and I came in as a freshman, I was so behind. I was in Algebra 1 as a 9th grader. And I remember the textbook, it was this bright red textbook. And I remember the Singapore American school where I went, it was a highly competitive high school. A lot of very, very ambitious kids who were very, very smart, who were like playing varsity tennis, going to these like Stanford summer camps and everything like that. So I remember my freshman year, I walk into my Western Civ class and there was this kid. His name's actually Chris. And Chris was a very, very high achieving student. I remember when I sat down, I took out my textbook. He saw the Algebra 1 textbook and he just looked at me and he was like, "You're in Algebra 1?" And then I remember like it just embarrassed me to my core. And so I decided that year that like, you know what, like I'm tired of having this label on myself that I'm somehow like not smart enough. And I worked really, really hard, accelerated through a bunch of classes. And so you could say I came from a very humble beginning. And so I didn't have any of the kind of bravado that I would say Vishnu, who is always in like naturally gifted programs, that in a way almost like helped me, because I came to it with a humility, but at the same time, like I was fairly strategic. I was the co-secretary general of like one of the biggest MUN conferences in Asia. I did a lot of things that were sort of like definitely branded in that way. But most of all, I think I had a very deep love for filmmaking and film, and that was something that I could not possibly lie about. And I think that's what came through.
So it sounds like you demonstrated some vulnerability that, could connect, that allowed the reader to connect with you a little bit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's the one piece of advice I have for anybody applying to college. You have to be vulnerable. And I think the same thing applies to what good movies are. Good movies are movies where the protagonist is vulnerable, where you can actually get a sense into who that person is. Obviously, I've read some college essays where kids are like, "Oh, well, I got to be honest, right?" And they talk about like selling alcohol and how that makes them an entrepreneur. That's not what you want to do. What you do want to do is look within yourself. Think about what is it that you want to change? What is it that you felt you struggled with? If you write about that in a very honest way, it makes the page sing.
No, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Nobody likes someone who presents themselves as being absolutely 100% perfect. And you can write about a failure you've experienced or a mistake that you've made and how you've learned from it and how you've grown and changed over time.
I'd say two words: tension and conflict. Good applicants need their applications need to have some kind of tension. When I say tension, I mean basically two opposing ideas that the applicant is sort of like defined by, but it's sort of pulling them in opposite directions, because that just creates a sort of dynamic momentum. And a good example of that would be, for instance, my application. I looked really, really good on paper. But if you looked to my freshman year of high school, I was in the very basic, slow classes. So when an admissions officer looks at that improvement, there is that tension, there is that sort of growth, and that makes you stand out. So the idea is that you do not have to be perfect from the get-go. Matter of fact, change is more impressive than being sort of a natural. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Even if you didn't have a worse freshman year and a gradual improvement as you go to senior year, you can still demonstrate or communicate some sort of tension that may not have come across on paper, or some sort of improvement that may not have come across on paper, maybe not in the classroom, but maybe in an extracurricular activity like a sport.
Absolutely.
Where you built some sort of skill through practice. Now, one thing I'm curious about, guys, is, in the movie, the tension and the conflict. Can you tell us a little bit about how that lesson applies maybe within the movie, or how that came into how you wrote the script for the movie?
The script was very reflective, in a sense that it actually truly sort of was us looking back at our high school experience and the college admissions process, and thinking, how did this make us feel then, and trying to, I guess, can that emotions in and put that into the movie. So when you see someone like Rohan and here, I don't want to spoil the movie for the audience, interact, it's based on very true interactions that Ryan has had with his friends, or I've had with our friends, or even Ryan and I have had together, and we've tried to embed as much true emotion as we can. Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah. So look, everything in that film comes from a very, very deep place within our own experience, because you have to understand, coming from Asia, there's that immense pressure. You have to get into that school. You're worthless if you don't get in that school. And so everybody around you is thinking that way. And let me tell you something. Getting into an Ivy League school in Asia gives you a great senior year, because suddenly everyone respects you. It's almost like walking around with a badge. No one sort of questions your intelligence. You never have to be insecure about it. And that is something that people really, really highly value. And it ends up creating this very toxic environment where people are ranking themselves in that year for the first time in their life.
Sure, becomes a kind of winner-take-all kind of thing. You get in, you're a huge success. You don't, you feel like a failure, and then you have to kind of adjust to that new reality, right?
Right. So, in the movie, the protagonist, Rohan Patel, he is a very, ambitious, smart scholar from India, and he thinks he's going to get into an Ivy League school, and he doesn't. And the thing is, a lot of people want to see him fail. So when he comes to school that morning, and he hasn't posted or announced anything on Facebook, he just can't accept that fact. And it hurts him. It hurts him really badly. And so he tells a lie. And it goes out of control. And that lie, it ends up changing the way people think about him. It ends up changing his social circles. It ends up changing how he even thinks of himself. And
he starts believing it.
At a certain point, he starts believing it.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the real lie, I guess, that what Vishnu and I went through, he told me that he got into Harvard. I was really happy for him. And the problem is that the news starts spreading like wildfire, and it's very difficult to contain.
Yeah. So it's actually based on a true story. I don't know if we mentioned that. I actually lied to Ryan about getting in because I was intensely jealous that he got into Yale, and I wanted to sort of one-up him in that sense. So the lie started out that way, where I told, I was like, I got into Harvard, and then Ryan was like, wait, really? And then the lie started spreading, and obviously he found out the truth because we had way too many mutual friends to conceal something like that. And it was a very sobering moment for me, to be like, well, Vishnu, you did not get in. You thought you would have, you thought you should have, but you didn't, and that's the fact. And you have to figure out why that happened. And I guess the film was sort of a discovery process for me as well.
Well, it's kind of funny thinking about it. Like let's say you don't get into Harvard, you lie and say you did. I guess that technically, you've got a full year before anyone's gonna find out, right?
Right.
Yeah, so you
kind
can
of keep going through the rest of senior year. And
you can reap the benefits. Yeah.
And then you come into fall, your friends like, okay, next year, your friends are like, hey, can I come visit you at Harvard? And you're like, well, I'm not actually in the dorms, but I rented this apartment off campus. Come visit me there. And it makes me think of this. Yeah. Makes me think of this story about a kid I heard a couple of years ago. I think this kid, didn't get into Stanford or Harvard, I forget which, but she basically lied to someone on campus, said she got in, and said, my roommate's terrible, can I crash in your dorm room? And she started attending classes and auditing and living on campus, and everyone thought she was a real student.
Wow.
Got in and gone there and was paying tuition, and she kept up the lie to her family and everything, but none of it was true. I'll have to see if I can find that article and send it to you guys. I'm sure you'd get a kick out of it. But yeah, it's funny. There is that huge incentive to lie. No doubt about it.
Yeah, and it's especially with social media, like, the nature of Facebook where people start posting their acceptances, you start getting posts on your wall, hey, where did you get in? And you just feel this immense pressure building up inside of you. There's nothing that's private anymore about the high school experience, right? You're around your friends all the time, you're liking each other's posts, you're seeing other people celebrate, and you want to be a part of that celebration. And it just sort of taps into that instinct to be like, okay, this is my group and I want to show them that I belong here, so you end up lying.
No, sure, the incentives are definitely there. I'm wondering, I know that, one thing we really love to hear on this podcast are stories. And I'm wondering if you could tell me, we've already talked about some of the worst moments you guys have had, but I'm wondering about, moments of inspiration you had related to the college admissions process, those light bulb moments. Does anything come to mind?
So, this is interesting. I think this takes us very much to the college essay, because the college essay, in my opinion, is one of the hardest parts of the application process, because you can never really tell, is it done, is it good enough? It's very hard to tell. I was really struggling with my essay, and I remember coming, because we read essays out in like AP Lit and English class and stuff like that, and I just remember my essay wasn't flying, it wasn't good, and it was actually the night before that I wrote probably the best college essay that I could, and it really came from the heart. It was about my relationship with certain members of my family. I have a very, very complicated, very complicated family background, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to write about it. But in that moment of holy crap, I only have 8 hours before the gates close, right? I just wrote it and turned it in, and the reason why it worked was because it was just entirely true. So,
and I have to say, it's one of the best essays I've ever read. I just want to jump in here and say that very honestly. Like, I still remember reading it and going, wow, that's an essay. It is one of the most honest and most well-written college essays I have ever read. And it's incredible.
Vish, I'm wondering for you, I know that you said that you kind of demonstrate too much bravado, too much presenting yourself as being kind of perfect in your essay. If you could go back now and do it differently, how might have you approached it?
I would have spoken about something a lot more honest. Something that I was actually feeling that time was a lack of belonging in Singapore, just a lack of belonging in my friends group. I was very different from most of my peers. Instead, I think that's one part of the reason why I overcompensated in the essay and made myself seem a certain way when in reality I was a very sort of awkward, very socially awkward kid. I sort of, in the essay and in the application, painted myself to be a very confident, very cocksure kid. And I guess the one thing I would have done differently is, do what Ryan said, write from the heart, write about something that really matters to you. So that's what I would have done.
Sure.
And I also had a very different background from all of the kids in my school. I went to a very elite boys' school, and I came from a very sort of, I would pretty much say like middle class to poor family. So I never felt in place in that school. Never felt like I belonged in any sort of sense in those 6 years I had in that boys' school. And I would have written about that most probably, but that time I was too insecure to be able to actually reveal that. And I think that cost me a lot in the admissions process.
What's so interesting about this journey is that Vishnu really revealed this with the very sort of first draft of the, acceptance, which we then continued to sort of rewrite for the following year. It was almost like the movie Vishnu was your college essay in a weird way.
Yeah.
That's a great insight. I mean, definitely, would imagine that, a 650-word version of that script would make for an amazing essay in a way, right? Just kind of demonstrating what's going on inside the head of a protagonist who, wants to portray himself as a success and wants to fit in and get all that positive reinforcement from peers, but isn't getting it. And then how do you handle that?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Insights there, guys. Thanks so much for sharing those. I'm sure it'll be really helpful to our listeners who are thinking about their essay topics. I want to shift gears now, move into my favorite part of the interview, which is the lightning round. I'm going to ask you guys some rapid-fire questions. You give me some rapid-fire responses. Are you ready?
Yep.
Great. What's your number one piece of advice for the college admissions process?
I would say, and I think Ryan would disagree with me on this, is to be radically honest in the college admissions process. Portray who you are, and if they like it, they will let you in, and you'll have a better time in that university as a result of that.
I don't disagree with that. I think you do want to be honest. I wouldn't say you want to be radically honest. I mean, radically honest it's like, as I said, talking about selling cigarettes to other high schools. That's radically honest. You don't want to do that. I would say, keep it real, keep it humble, obviously set some boundaries. One piece of advice I do have, if you want to get into an Ivy League school, unfortunately, this is the very hard truth. You need at least a 2200. There are some people who get in with like a 2100. But that means that you've done something really, really incredible. Like you're one of the best organists in the country or things like that. But I would say that SAT is very important. If your goal is to get in, definitely get that checked off the list.
For sure, it's definitely good to be realistic about what SAT scores are necessary these days. So no question about that. And back to the radically honest thing. Yeah, I agree with what both you guys said. I would basically have a modified version saying, radically honest, with regard to things that are not irresponsible or illegal, right?
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Great advice there. Thanks, guys. Could you guys share with us one habit to college admissions success?
Read a lot is what I would say. Like, just keep reading fiction, nonfiction, broaden your horizons. Read outside of just your language set. Read books that are written in English, post-colonial literature, India, China, all of that stuff. There's a wealth of information out there, and in the interviews and stuff, you come across as being worldly and knowledgeable if you've read a lot.
Right, and I agree with what Vishnu said. I'd like to add to that, don't shy away from classes or activities that seem sort of like gutty or too easy or things like that. A good example is AP art history. That has the reputation for being sort of like, it's an easy AP. Well, first of all, it's not. But the thing is, doing things that aren't always on that like direct path to trying to impress an admissions officer, they end up helping you so much more. They end up distinguishing you. So I would really encourage people to sort of like pick up a craft, even if it's like Photoshop or Illustrator or, or web design, or whether it's film or writing, anything that's sort of like something that you want to get better at on your own. It really helps. And it's a good habit to develop, because eventually that's going to be sort of the basis of your career after college in many ways.
Oh, for sure. Honing a creative art, could turn into a hobby, or
Right.
even taking AP art history could then inform your graphic design work later in life, later in your career, and give you some additional insights. If you look at some of the big titans in startup world, a lot of them, even like Steve Jobs, for example, I think I read once he like took some sort of calligraphy class or something like that, and it helped inform his appreciation for fonts that became part of, the Apple logo or something like that.
Basically, don't be a robot.
Don't be closed off to new experiences.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. What's one online college admissions resource that you absolutely love?
I wouldn't be able to answer this. I didn't really use any online stuff back in 2010, so I think Ryan can answer this better.
Yeah, I would never post on College Confidential, but I would read stuff. Retrospectively, now that I think about it, I don't think that kids should really turn online to seek out too many advice blogs and forums, especially on sites like College Confidential, because sometimes it can either mislead them or create a heightened sense of competitiveness. Obviously, you do want to seek out counsel, but I would say a site like College Confidential, it can freak you out. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Oh, for sure. Those forums can definitely kind of become echo chambers and lead to heightened stress. So you want to, if you're going to use them, definitely use them in moderation and don't just kind of lurk on there endlessly instead of actually working on your essay or studying for the SAT. Definitely agree there. What's one book that you believe no college applicant should be without?
If you're talking about sort of a fiction/nonfiction book that isn't related to the admissions process, I'd say one book that I wish I'd read back in high school that, looking back, would have really helped center me and, I guess, humble me down was this book I read called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah, I know.
It's a fantastic book. It's a very, very ancient book. It's written by a Roman emperor, but it's got a lot of advice. It's actually very, very, very prescient and very useful for people who are in that age group. It teaches you a lot about being humble, being but thinking a lot about who you are as a person, and it sort of would have helped me a lot if I'd read it in high school and if I took that kind of stuff seriously. That's what I would say.
I actually love that book. Stoic philosophy can kind of reduce your stress level and help you look at the bigger picture more. So at the very least, it could help you reduce your stress before you take the SAT. But in general, it can kind of reduce your stress with the whole college admissions process, helping you be comfortable with the idea that even if you don't get into Harvard or don't get into an Ivy, things can still work out for you in the end, right?
Yeah.
Ryan, any books come to mind?
Yeah, I could think of The Prince by Machiavelli. That would definitely.
Yeah.
I was deciding between The Prince and.
I think both of those are definitely two different ways of going about it. I'm not saying I endorse that method, but.
It's funny because Ryan did the meditations method, I did the Prince method, which is why we're making these recommendations.
But the Prince method can work.
Yeah. But
anyway, okay, one book that I really think that kids should get their hands on. It's called College Essays That Made a Difference. I just remember, going in Barnes and Nobles. I never actually bought it, but I stumbled on it. I opened it up and I kind of perused through it. The thing I noticed about every single college essay, they're all told in a sort of short story format. So you're not really talking about yourself. You're talking about what you're doing. You're describing a scene. And I felt that book really served as sort of like a guideline for what I wrote.
Yeah, it's good just to have some examples to look at to give you a sense of what works, what doesn't, just kind of to inspire you loosely. Obviously, you don't want to steal anything because everything can be. You can Google a quote from something and discover where it came from, but definitely just to get some general inspiration is really valuable. So I know that you guys you've released Acceptance. It's on YouTube, by the way, so check it out. I'll link to that in the show notes. But what are you guys working on now?
Oh, a lot of things. Ryan and I just graduated from our separate universities, and life is now kind of an open book for us. There's so many things we can do. I'm currently working on a tech startup out of Toronto, and in terms of film, I think Ryan, you want to take a lead on that, on what we're working on next?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the company that we're trying to start, it's called Scholar Edition, and we're really focused on making multicultural content that is sort of emotionally riveting and real, very similar to Acceptance. So right now, Vishnu and I are really trying to just grow as screenwriters first before we start kind of producing more content, because we feel that is sort of the core of why
filmmaking. Yeah.
Right, it really is the core.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our short-term goal.
So yeah, we're just writing consistently, trying to get as many scripts as we can, enhancing them, getting to the level that we're proud of them. It's just mostly just like background work right now. There's no huge productions coming up just yet, but yeah, that's what we're working on.
Well, that's really exciting. Well, you guys gave us a ton of great advice today on the college admissions process, and thanks so much for sharing, your story about Acceptance. I definitely recommend everyone listening out there check it out. It's less than an hour, and it's on YouTube, so you can watch for free from anywhere in the world. Highly recommend it. great film. I'm sure a lot of you guys will connect with it. And Ryan and Vishnu, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, and
Thank
Ryan.
you.
There are a million books out there about applying to college, but it's hard to know which ones are worth buying and which are just a waste of time. When I was applying to college, I felt like most of them weren't really saying anything that I didn't already know. And a lot of the others were just plain boring. So I've put together a list of the best books I've read on the admissions process. I've got books on there about college essays, scholarships, and test prep. So check it out. It's at collegeadmissionstoolbox.com/books. Thanks for listening to College Admissions Toolbox. Head over to www.collegeadmissionstoolbox.com to get more free tools and resources that will help you get into the colleges of your dreams.